face 300 years of New Hampshire history. Heritage New Hampshire, a unique historical experience. And by the Balsam's Grand Hotel, a 15,000-acre resort high in the White Mountains, providing traditional American plan hospitality and, above all else, individual guest service since 1866.
Today we find ourselves here beside Route 3, about 2 miles outside of Lancaster, New Hampshire, at Weeks State Park. And it is here we start our Just Up the Road today. At Weeks State Park, we will first travel north on Route 3 into Lancaster. From there, we'll continue north on 3 into the township of Northumberland, which is where the village of Groveton is located. And on the way, we're going to go for a visit in Guildhall, Vermont. Then we'll take a back road south from Groveton through the area called Lost Nation and end up back in Lancaster, about 21 miles in all. But we start here at Weeks State Park. I thought I knew a lot about the state of New Hampshire, and I didn't know this place existed.
Well, it's one of our hidden treasures.
It sure enough is. This is Mary Sloat. Mary's the ranger here at Weeks State Park. As you see, it's a home. Used to be the summer home of one John Wingate Weeks, a man who was born and grew up in Lancaster just after the Civil War. Now, John Wingate Weeks was an Annapolis graduate, a successful investment banker, a one-time mayor of Newton, Massachusetts, a congressman, a senator, and finally, Secretary of War under 2 presidents, Calvin Coolidge and Warren Harding. And back in the early 20s, President Harding himself was a guest here at the Weeks estate.
Harding was up here for 8 or 9 days. It's vacation with his wife. They slept in the bedroom in the back here. There's a plaque in there about that. And I think one of the wonderful things was that they set up a golf course out here on the top of the mountain to play golf, because this is what he liked to do. Theodore Roosevelt shot the moose, and it's 32 points. The story goes that they figured it weighed 3,000 pounds. I think a lot of people dispute that amount, but it is a very, very large moose, and it was shot here in New Hampshire. It was given to John Wingate Weeks by Theodore Roosevelt.
And today the Weeks home is owned by the state. In the upstairs hall, lectures and musicals are presented in the summertime, and downstairs there's a stuffed museum and an art gallery. Oh, and by the way, and not incidentally, when President Warren Harding came to Lancaster in 1921, along with John Wingate Weeks, was Robert Todd Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln's son. And speaking of son, turns out that John Wingate Weeks's son, Sinclair, was a chip off the old block, because Sinclair Weeks was also in a cabinet. Eisenhower administration. He was Secretary of Commerce. That's him, seated 2 up from Vice President Richard Nixon and 2 down from Chief of Staff and former New Hampshire Governor Sherm Adams. And all of this memorabilia of the Weeks family, including the chair that Sinclair Weeks had in Washington, D.C., all of this is preserved not in the Weeks estate, but in the Lancaster Historical Society building, the Wilder Holton House.
It was the first 2-story frame building in Coos County. I believe I'm right.
This is Margaret Carr. Margaret Carr is the correspondent for Lancaster at the Coos County Democrat. And she probably knows as much about the area as any person north of the Notches. Are you a native here?
Yes, I've always lived here.
Of course, great-grandparents are up there.
That's right.
Your maiden name was?
Savage. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, my husband.
Well, I do envy you living here. And that's
I love it too.
An absolute truth.
Yes. Yeah, it's a nice place. A lot of people think it's, have said it was a wolf, but it isn't. It's a fox. And it was given by the Lancaster Unit. It was done by a very famous sculptress, Anna Hyatt, of New York City.
Would I know anything she's done?
She has done many things in the Central Park. Is it Central or Park in New York? Her statues are all over New York City.
I had heard, this may be apocryphal and this may not be a nice thing to say, but I had heard that it was a work that she had done already.
That's true. That's true, and that's why we were able to get it.
Oh.
Because, of course, being a famous sculptress, her prices ran very high. And she did this for somewhere else, and it was supposed to spout water out of the mouth, and it wasn't high enough or whatever for whomever ordered it, and so they wouldn't accept it. And I don't know how Lancaster came to be connected, but someone knew someone, obviously, and we were able to get it at a price that we could afford.
Now, just north of Lancaster, about the time you get to the Historical Society building, Route 2 branches off west. But we're going to stay on Route 3, north, toward Groveton. A mile or so, and we pass the Lancaster Fair. 2 more miles, and we get to Northumberland. But look here, right across the Connecticut River, not 100 yards away, is this, Guildhall, Vermont. Whoops, I mispronounced the name. The sign here says that the D is silent, like my daddy used to say, like the Q in billiards. Around these parts, it's Guildhall. And it's about as perfect as a town gets.
We have an attorney who practices at the Essex Superior Court, and he refers to Guildhall as Brigadoon. And I think there's some logic to that characterization, because as you cross from New Hampshire into Guildhall, Vermont, it's almost like stepping back in history 100 years. The sense of history, in my estimation, is very palpable in Guildhall Village, simply because the village has retained its form that it achieved during the 1850s and has changed little since then. The attorney describes his first case in Guildhall. He arrived on a very foggy morning.
Hodgson. He's a resident of Guildhall and one of the local historians. He is also, not incidentally, the judge of the Essex County Court. For you see, Guildhall is the county seat, just as Lancaster is the county seat for Coos County. And not only does Judge Hodgson administer justice here, he has also overseen the restoration of the inside of the courthouse.
The courtroom had an imitation brick linoleum floor, green fabric wallpaper, suspended Armstrong ceiling, and it was a charming rural county courthouse. So the first thing I did is we had some excess funds. So what I did is took away the Armstrong ceiling, ripped up the linoleum, and restored the wide pine board floor, restored the walls, restored the matchboard ceiling, and the lighting fixtures, fortunately, were preserved in the attic.
Judge Hodgson, by the way, lives right here on the Guildhall Common, right beside the Congregational Church, in the former jailhouse.
There are lots of stories about the prisoners competing with the congregation when they were singing hymns. Every time they started to sing a hymn, the prisoners in the jail would start singing 99 bottles of beer on the wall to try to drown them out.
Now, right across the river from Guildhall, and just up the road, is one of the area's landmarks, Doopy's store. For years it's been said, if you can't find it at Doopy's, you probably don't need it. It's a real general store.
A real general store.
From
We have basic grocery supplies, gift shop supplies, knickknacks, clothing, footwear, some fishing tackle, hunting gear. You name it, and we have it.
Do you sell hunting licenses?
No.
Actually, that's being unfair to manager Richard Potter. We just kind of blundered into the one thing that they don't sell. They do have just about everything else at Doopy's, including some...
Oh, you're such a ham.
Just right.
You're such a ham.
Sandy Potter Gagnon's family has lived on this farm in Northumberland for 4 generations, and she took us way out beyond the fields of the farm to a spot overlooking the Connecticut River.
This states it is the rendezvous of many of Rogers' Rangers returning from the attack on the Indians at St. Francis Village, now Audinac, Quebec, 1759. From what my parents have told me, that my Ames were sent up here from Concord, Massachusetts, to explore the Coos County area. Their real mission, their secret mission, was to see if the Indians were coming down and invading these areas and these settlements, for them to be up in this area. The meeting house that you see across the street was built in 1771, and it was the first public town building for the town of Northumberland. It served as the town's meeting house, its school, and its church.
We should know. All right, let's go.
The timber that we're looking at on the wall is the timber from the fort I mentioned to you. If you take a good look at it from a distance, perhaps you could see the pork barrels that I mentioned before. If you stand back, you can see these rings. That's the brine that, probably the brine is the reason it is preserved, that it's permeated with it.
Yes, you heard right. This is an actual timber from the original Fort Wentworth. Now, the northernmost part of Northumberland is the township of Groveton, employer, the Warsaw Paper Mills. Now, from Groveton, we turn east onto Route 110, but we only go about 100 yards, and there we turn south, following this sign to Lost Nation. 5 miles down the road, and we come to this sign, and here is where master canoe maker William Novacek makes genuine birch bark canoes.
Well, I'm the type of people to go out in the woods. It's more fun being in the woods, and cheaper too than hardware stores, and everything on this is right out of the woods. There's nothing that you buy, except to buy the wood from state forest or people that own private wood lots.
Bill Novacek gets $1,500 for a 15-foot canoe. Not bad. But you know, with all of the love that he puts into it, it just breaks his heart to have to sell one.
Yeah, to be honest with you, it does, but at least I can do something I enjoy for part of my livelihood.
Just up the road, and we come to the place that they call Lost Nation. And everyone, it seems, has a different story as to how this place was named, but the common thread in all of the stories is that it's a hard place to find your way out of. But we managed to find our way out. Up the road we came to this, the sign to God Road. And this road leads to perhaps the most interesting place, Mill. Been here since Eben C. Garland built it back in 1856. And in the 140 years plus that this mill has operated, it has operated by water power, and water power only. It is the last of its kind. And according to mill operator Harry Southworth, there are reasons for this.
I mean, why would you want to, to have a business where you can only saw the wood for 8 months a year? You know, that's not very smart or businesslike. And it's only because we've gotten into timber framing and some of these other things that we're able to, keep just to our wives that we should be allowed to come out here and play. Is, the long and the short of that. Where the real action is downstairs. You can see all the water flowing, you can see all the belts and the shivs and everything. Yeah. Wood that you see in here at the moment, we cut out at the sawmill. A retreat for Harold and Betsy Janeway. Wonderful folks from down in the Concord area.
Hold on now, don't you change that channel, because in just a few minutes we're coming back with another just up the road adventure north of the Notches. We're going from Colebrook up to Pittsburgh, and we're going to see some moose. In the meantime, if you like what we do, then join our family, become a member of New Hampshire Public Television. Go to your telephone right now and call the number that you see on the screen. Please.
New Hampshire Public Television.
Today we're in Colebrook, New Hampshire, north of the Notches. And it is here that we start our Just Up the Road today. Today, our trip will take us to the upper part of Coos County, where we'll travel from Colebrook north on Route 145 up to the most northern town in New Hampshire, the town of Pittsburgh. Of course, it would be kind of silly to go all the way to Pittsburgh and not continue up Route 3 to the Canadian border, and so we'll take a quick trip up and back. Maybe see some moose along the way. And then we'll motor our way south on Route 3 back to Colebrook with a couple of short stops at Stewartstown and West Stewartstown along the way. In all, we'll travel about 75 miles on this trip. But we start here in Colebrook, and as luck would have it, we picked up a guide for the first part of our adventure, John Harrigan. John, as you no doubt know, is the publisher of the News and Sentinel in Colebrook and is also the publisher of the Coos County Democrat down in Lancaster. He's a native. Anyhow, John took us right to his favorite road in the state, Route 145. And a couple miles outside of town, he pulled in here.
You know, one of New Hampshire's best kept secrets here is this waterfall in the middle of nowhere. We're on 145, just up the road from Colebrook on the back road to Pittsburgh. The only road I ever take to Pittsburgh, by the way, and my favorite road in the whole state right here, Route 145. It violates every federal safety standard and road building spec. It has curves and hills, and you really actually have to use your steering wheel and actually use your brake and your gas pedal. It requires a little thought and some driver attention. So this is disappearing, by the way, from the scene. But there's Beaverbrook Falls, been flowing here for longer than any person ever walked here. Quite a sizable waterfall.
Up the road about 3 miles or so, and John stopped at a place that you'd never notice unless somebody called your attention to it.
This is an old stump farm, a settlement farm that dates right back to when this particular part of the country was settled, around 1820. This farm is just as it was when it was first built. It hasn't been changed a bit. It never had electricity. It does have running into the house. But the only concession to modern times that it ever made as an institution was a telephone. And when I was a kid, I used to hitchhike and run up from Colebrook up to Clarksville Pond, and I'd stop in here and visit with J.C. Kenneth Poor. And J.C. Kenneth Poor lived to a ripe old age in his late 90s, as I recall, and died only 15 years or so ago. His father was in the Civil War. But someone's here today because there are 2 vehicles in the yard, unless they left them here just to act as deterrents. Anybody home? Yo! Yo! Who is it?
There he is! How'd you know I was calling you?
Hey, Rick.
Good to see you.
Fritz Weatherby, Rick Johnson.
How you doing?
Steve.
Steve, nice to meet you.
Channel 11.
Oh, good.
Fritz, I know, I've watched it, but I can't remember the title. And we're stopping at little places along 145 in the North Country, and I couldn't go by the J.C. Kenneth Poor homestead. I'm John Harrigan.
Russ Newton. Nice to
Hi,
meet
Russ.
you.
Fritz Weatherby.
Hi. Nice to work.
And Steve, the camera guy.
For the next,
an intern.
Another month we got to go. Yeah.
Well, I just told Steve and Fritz about the small dedicated band of volunteers that are keeping this place from falling down, burning up, or
we're just
rotting.
now trying to decide what we're going to do down there.
This is an ox dump cart, and look at this. Look, Rick just pulled the pin out. This thing has got to be, it's got to date from the mid 1800s, yeah. And look at it, it's still perfect.
Oh, tips like that.
It's still just fingertip tip, beautifully made.
It's shaking and scratching and blowing right now.
Next stop just up the road is at John's camp on Lake. Well, John would rather not tell you which lake. But if you wanted to find out, probably anyone in Colebrook could tell you which lake. I understand nobody's caught fish in this lake in 25 years.
Oh, there are no fish here. absolutely none. Oh, there are some trash fish here, and that's what these loons are fishing for, but as far as trout, absolutely not. No, it's a waste of gas to come here. We come to, watch the birds.
It is true. He don't hear half what I say, but part of it he don't want to.
Yeah. Like time to take out the garbage, Jimmy?
Yeah.
Anyway, if and when I find a mower for that, could you help? Could you show me how to rig it?
Well, it's different in your mowers.
I know it. That's what I'm worried about. So.
Well.
I may ask you to come down and give me a pointer if you don't mind.
Well, you get a mower. You want a 3-point hitch?
I got one.
Yeah, but mower.
Yeah, I want the mower to go on a 3-point hitch. Yeah. I got power takeoff in the back.
We can step up with this old Ford mower. It's the toughest son of a bitch of a mower I ever see.
You still running it?
Sure, it's dog.
That brand of English you just heard is not a speech impediment. That's the old high country English. And if you could talk to Jimmy long enough, you'd find out he uses words that you don't hear, like shan't, I shan't, or I'll fetch this. Example after example of that old is almost an Elizabethan English, very close to the Elizabethan English you'll hear on the eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay.
I wanted to drink off about that morning. I went to Coburg and got me some beer and my groceries and drove right by that liquor store and they were open.
Yeah.
And it took me about a year to get over somebody with a beer or a drink in their hand, but I was hankering.
Yeah.
And it took me a year to get over it.
Well, that's after you lost Reva.
Hmm?
That's after you lost Reva.
Yeah. I drink some before, but nothing.
Nothing like that. Yeah.
But Christ, I wouldn't see nobody for a week in time unless I went out and stopped the snowplow and talked to them.
What are you doing here, Jim? What were you doing?
Hmm?
What are you doing here?
Me?
Yeah.
You know, like I've been waiting around to see if a doctor wanted more, but we haven't got a mite of hay in yet. I do the mowing and baling. No good.
Man's name is Jimmy Ricker, and he is the last of a breed, the authentic North Country Yankee.
Metallic was the last of the Coashaukis. The Coashaukis were an offshoot of the Abenaki tribe, and Coashauki is the derivation or the origin of the name name Coas, Coashauki Indians, which everybody says Coos, but it's Coas from Coashauki. And Metallic died at the reputed age of 120, and in 1847 he was what they called a town charge. He died a pauper, blind, but he roamed this country from here over toward Umbagog and Rangeley, Mooslick, Maguntic Lake, Ziskawas Lake. Those are all Indian names, and here's Metallic. And he's buried just up the road here in Cream Poke. His grave's up there and well tended, and he's kind of a local icon of a day not too distant.
Now, about this time, John Harrigan had other commitments to fulfill, and so we thanked him very much and said goodbye. We were only a mile or so outside our next destination, the town of Pittsburgh. And by the way, the name is spelled Pittsburg. There is no H in the name. The H place, as we all know, is down below. Now, Pittsburgh, New Hampshire has a lot of history. It is, of course, the source of the Connecticut River. But did you know that a good deal of this town was at one time a nation unto itself? Well, it's true. You see, back in 1832, both Canada and the United States claimed ownership of an area that's up here, an area between Hall's Stream and the Indian Stream. Well, the people who lived there set up parks on both your houses, and they declared themselves an independent nation. They called themselves the Republic of Indian Stream. Well, the Indian Stream Republic lasted only 4 years. A treaty gave final jurisdiction of the area to the United States. Now, the town is certainly cognizant of its wonderful history, even has an official historical society housed here in the old town hall. And Selectman Bing Judd kindly let us in and gave us a pretty impressive statistic about the town.
Of course, the largest township in the state or the country.
I was told east of the Mississippi.
Well, I think it's even gone beyond. I believe there was a town in Texas that was larger, but I think they split a few years ago. I think now this is the largest township in the
350...
A little over 300 square miles.
So not only is Pittsburgh the most northern town in New Hampshire, it is also the biggest in area, perhaps in all the 50 states. Now, Pittsburgh is, and always has been, mostly farming and logging and recreation. But a century ago, there was industry around, too. Someone, it seems, invented a better clothespin and manufactured it here. I, for one, don't understand why it never caught on. So here we are going north on Route 3. Traveling the 22 miles up to the Canadian border. We go past the sources of the Connecticut River, the first Connecticut lake, and the second Connecticut lake. But before we reach the third Connecticut lake, we have this, the most northern campground in New Hampshire.
I run this park.
Park Ranger Albert Van Dorman.
The way the state wants it run. 10 o'clock at night till 7 in the morning is quiet. I says, and I insist on it. I had a couple of young fellows up here. Well, one day this week they wanted a map they wanted to go through, so I gave them a map, and they're sitting there kind of looked, I could see the cases of beer. I'm not against it, as long as they, use it right. So I told them right out, I said, look, I'm going to tell you before you even register or look, this is a quiet park from 10 till 7 in the morning. They never even looked at it. They look for a place to party. Yeah. I said, it's not fair to the other people. No. It isn't.
So here we are in Canada. Now, the reason we didn't show you the border guards is because we were informed that to film them required permission from higher-ups, and we didn't have that permission. But I gotta say, both the Canadian and the U.S. border guards were very nice to us. Just no pictures. But hey, we just wanted to see if Canada, just 100 yards away, was any different from the U.S. Turns out, it is spectacularly different. This is not only a national border, but all of the water that flows on this side of the divide goes down into the St. Lawrence, and all of the water on the other side of the border, less than a mile away, flows into Long Island Sound. And of course, on the U.S. side, they speak English, and on the Canadian side, French. We only went a couple of miles into Canada, and then we turned right around. You see, we just had to cross over because we were there. So now we're headed back down Route 3 again, and we know we're in Pittsburgh because of the signs that say, "Brake for Moose." Greetings, moose lovers. You know, it's possible on virtually any evening around sundown to see moose here on Route 3 just north of Pittsburgh. Now, a few miles south of Pittsburgh, and we turn right onto Tabor Road to go a bit into the Indian Stream Nation country. The sheep here belong to a farm, which is owned by John and Nancy Amy. At Stewartstown, we stop at the 1926 hydroelectric dam. And then we go down and cross the bridge into Beecher's Falls, Vermont. Less than a mile up this road is the Ethan Allen Furniture Company and the Canadian border. But if just across the bridge you turn right, then that road will take you here.
This is the town line between Pittsburgh, New Hampshire, and Canaan, Vermont. And what makes this interesting is that this is the only place where you can cross from New Hampshire into Vermont without first going across the Connecticut River. And also, this is the only place in New Hampshire where you can go south, that's due south right there, into Vermont, and not west. And the reason for that is because there's this funny little jag on the map. Did you ever notice it?
Traveling back toward town, we pass some more sheep belonging to the Amy family. A brief look at West Stewartstown and its sister town, Canaan, Vermont, and then back down Route 3 to Colebrook, where we travel outside of town on Route 26 to make one last special visit.
How come you got interested in this?
Well, I started out farming. And the business wasn't too good there either, you know, I mean, it's the same today.
Terrible.
So I went into trucking, you know, trucking sawdust and lime, fertilizer, anything a farmers needed, which was a pretty good business. And although, like a lot of the farmers, you couldn't collect, I'd take machinery or something in trade for my pay, and I had to sell that, get my money, and it didn't take me long to
Soon one thing led to another.
get to trucking. I went into machinery.
This is Eddie Nash. Everyone in the North Country knows Eddie. And in fact, a great many people outside the North Country know Eddie, thousands. And the reason is that Eddie Nash owns one of the largest second-hand heavy equipment dealerships in America.
We repair about everything in skidders, motors, we wash everything out here.
One of the things that I noticed when I came on site here was that everybody was working.
They do when I come around.
Well, that's our just up the road. Let's see. We've seen a waterfall and some moose, the Canadian border, the halfway mark between the equator and the North Pole, some beautiful scenery, and some real Yankee characters, all in less than 75 miles. Hey, happy motoring.